You have your reasons for questioning your faith, and you have your reasons for leaving the church. I do too. So let's talk about that. This is the Spiritually Homesteading podcast. What is the Spiritually Homesteading podcast? Well, in this case, it's a vlogcast where we're going to talk about how to lose your religion and keep your faith. We're going to talk about how to grow a faith outside the church, outside the systems that have been set into place that are currently making us question whether or not our faith is even real anymore. Okay, before we move into this journey together, I wanted to tell you about my background. I wanted to tell you about the things that made me question the church. I wanted to tell you about the things that made me question my faith and how I got there. You could decide whether or not this is a place where you want to continue to learn from. I think it's so important that you ask yourself that question because you are the CEO of your soul, okay? You are in charge of you. So you get to decide what makes sense for you spiritually. The church doesn't get to decide that. Your pastor doesn't get to decide that. And I think that's some of the biggest misconceptions that we have right now in the American church is that we spend a lot of time criticizing pastors and not enough time examining our own souls. So I want to take back some of that power that we give to the church and some of the power that we give to our pastors. And I want us to start owning and taking ownership of our own souls. That is why I call this spiritual homesteading, because what I want for you is to take ownership of the garden within your soul. So with that being said, I want to start with my testimony. So I grew up in a Catholic home. I feel like I knew Jesus right away. Like I used to have dreams about him as a child. I loved him tremendously. And it wasn't until my brother died in a car accident. I was 13 years old. He was 5 years older than me. He died in a car accident, and that was the end of my faith. I wasn't sure if I believed in God, if I trusted God anymore. That wasn't just the end of my faith. That was the end of my childhood. Like the bubble was popped, and I saw things for as they really were, as opposed to what I had imagined them to be. In a Catholic home, my family continued to want to teach me how to be a good little Catholic girl, and I was not having it. They wanted me to go to confirmation, and I went through confirmation simply because they asked me to, but my heart was not in it, and I was not interested in God. It wasn't until I was in my 20s where I began to reconsider God. I'd kind of been exploring other religions and other faiths, and it just wasn't really clicking for me. It wasn't, I don't know, something was missing, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And so I just sort of kept pursuing the question of what do I believe in? And then I landed in a non-denominational church, which was the first time that I felt like I could kind of piece together what I believed. And not just what I believed, but what was truth to me. And I have a really hard time buying into organized religion. I do not agree with it. I think it's a bunch of routine and traditions as opposed to like actual doctrine and theology. And I can't get behind tradition if it doesn't match doctrine. So that's just been my journey. Like I have been continuing to pursue this spiritual homesteading, if you will. And I was doing a pretty good job. Part of the thing that made my faith fall apart was I had a very specific dream that I was hoping that God would help me to achieve, and he didn't. And I couldn't understand why, because I felt like I had been made and created for this specific opportunity, for this specific path, and God just said no. I was resentful of that. I didn't know what to do about that. The other thing that contributed to the downfall of my faith were the stories of women who had been disenfranchised by the church, who had been wronged by the church, specifically Junia, and Anne Hutchinson. This woman was so powerful that Harvard University was created in her wake. She was a gifted speaker, preacher, and much of her doctrine and theology that we believe in today, she was advocating for that in her colony and was kicked out of her colony for it. She did such a good job of speaking and preaching and having such great spiritual insights that they ended up creating Harvard University so that they could better train men to handle her. There was Junia, whose name was changed to Janius in the Bible for the longest time to insinuate that she was a man, but she never was a man. And the fact that we were trying to change her to a man is a little bit suspicious. All of these stories combined, and many other women that I have read who have been pushed aside by the church, who had been hurt by the church, it began to feel personal for me too, because it began to make me wonder, does God really like women? Does God really not want much from women? Does God want women to just be mothers and wives and all that we can do is whatever we do inside our house? Is that it? I really had to work through that. So glad that I spent time facing my doubts. I am so glad I spent time wrestling with God because I came out better and stronger than ever before. I have a doctrine and theology that cannot be shaken. And so I began to uncover the shoving down of women in the church. And that just made me honestly hate the church all the more. Eventually, I healed from that. I began to look for other women to help me with this journey. I found so many women in history that were a part of the mission of Christ, that they were included with Christ. And I know it's not very apparent in the church. And at a first glance in the Bible, it kind of feels that way too, that God doesn't really care for women all that much, that he seems to like men more than he likes women. And that's just not true. I believe that God can use whoever he wants to use. And I have learned that, not because that's where I had decided to land, but that's because I examined both sides of the evidence, and I feel like I know who Jesus is, and because I know who Jesus is, I can see things more clearly than the church can. I can see things more clearly than religion can. And that is how I've sort of landed in this much healthier, stable place, because my faith is not dependent upon what men say about me in the church. My faith is not dependent upon what men say I can and cannot do in the church or in society or in the world. They don't get the final say. God does. Hey, thanks so much for being here and for listening to my story. And what's your story like? Why don't you comment down below about what you're struggling with? And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, then you can go to laurafarhi.com. That's F as in Frank, ARHY.com. I'll link it down below. You can send me a message there and we can talk and we can chat through your circumstances and what you're wrestling with. If this is something that you're interested in and you want to keep watching these videos, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel so we can continue to hang out and talk. And if you have any recommendations of things that you would like to see discussed, comment down below with that too. Also, I am turning this vlogcast into a podcast. So if you want to listen on the go, you can go to Spiritually Homesteading on Apple or Spotify, wherever you like to stream your podcast. We will be there as well. Thank you for watching, and peace, love, and Jesus, y'all. Boop.